Medieval Europe dominates our image of the past's technological might. Yet across the world, ancient China engineered marvels that silently shaped civilization. We are about to uncover 30 forgotten inventions that rewrite history itself. You will discover mechanical computers that mapped the stars and earthquake detectors that functioned with uncanny precision. How did a bronze urn predict distant tremors, and what kept a towering clock running for centuries without electricity? What does it truly mean to build something that lasts 1,000 years deep within the ancient imperial courts? A mechanical marvel defied the very idea of getting lost. The south-pointing chariot was not guided by any magnetic force, but by pure mechanical genius. Picture a beautifully ornate bronze figure standing atop a chariot, its arm perpetually stretched toward the south. No matter how many times the chariot turned left or right, through the chaos of a moving army or a winding mountain path, the figure never wavered. It always knew the way. This was an ancient GPS operating centuries before the magnetic compass was perfected for navigation. The secret was not in magic, but in mathematics and an incredibly sophisticated system of differential gears. Inside the chariot's housing, a series of interlocking wooden or bronze gears calculated the difference in rotation between the two wheels. When the chariot turned, one wheel would cover a shorter distance than the other. The gears would automatically compensate for this difference, adjusting the figure on top to counteract the turn and maintain its southern orientation. It was a physical computer, its gears solving complex equations of motion with every revolution. For Chinese generals and long-distance travelers, this device was a strategic advantage of the highest order. In featureless deserts or under starless skies, when landmarks vanished and the sun was hidden, the unwavering bronze figure provided a constant, reliable reference point. It guided entire campaigns and secured supply routes, all through the silent, relentless logic of its internal mechanism. How many empires were shaped by the unerring direction of this mechanical guide? The genius of this chariot lay in a principle we now call negative feedback. As the wheels turned, the gears inside performed a continuous, automatic correction. Think of it as a mechanical brain that constantly noticed its own errors and fixed them without any human input. This was not a simple compass. It had no magnetized needle seeking alignment with the Earth's poles. Instead, its direction was born entirely from the mathematics of its own movement. The central figure was connected through a complex train of gears to both wheels. When the chariot traveled in a perfectly straight line, the wheels spun at the same rate and the figure remained still. But the moment the chariot began to turn, a beautiful sequence unfolded. The inner wheel, covering a shorter distance, would rotate more slowly than the outer wheel. This difference in speed was instantly transmitted through the gear system, which then rotated the figure on top in the exact opposite direction of the turn. The sharper the turn, the faster the correction. The result was that the arm of the bronze figure appeared to float, perpetually locked onto the southern horizon despite the chaotic motion below. Historians and engineers have long debated whether this was a practical tool used on rough terrain or a magnificent demonstration of a philosophical concept. Some ancient texts describe its use in grand imperial processions, a symbol of the emperor's unwavering moral direction. Others suggest it was a real, working navigational instrument. The truth may lie in the fact that building such a device required extraordinary craftsmanship. The gears had to be cut with immense precision. Any significant friction or backlash in the system would cause the figure to drift over time, slowly accumulating error until its pointing became useless. This leads to a tantalizing question. Was the south-pointing chariot a testament to what Chinese engineers could actually build? Or was it a brilliant thought experiment made physical, a challenge left for future generations to perfect? Precision of that kind required a stable foundation, a world that did not shake. Yet the Earth itself was anything but stable. While one device pointed unerringly across the land, another was built to listen to the land's own deep and violent whispers. In the year 132, during the Han Dynasty, a brilliant scholar and astronomer named Zhang Heng unveiled a machine that seemed to possess a supernatural sense. It was a magnificent bronze urn standing nearly 6 feet tall. Around its body, 8 dragon heads gazed outward, each holding a single bronze ball in its jaws. Crouched below each dragon sat a corresponding bronze frog, its mouth wide open, waiting. When the earth trembled hundreds of miles away, the urn knew. One of the dragons would clench its jaw, releasing the ball to fall with a loud clang into the mouth of the frog directly beneath it. The direction of the quake was instantly revealed. The Han court was astounded. How could this vessel of metal and artistry feel a shudder they could not, predicting tremors from distant provinces with uncanny accuracy? The secret lay in a pendulum of genius simplicity hidden inside the beautiful casing. At the heart of the urn, a heavy mass was suspended freely, like a large weight hanging from a central rod. This mass was perfectly balanced, but it was surrounded by a series of cleverly arranged levers, each one connected to a dragon's head on the outside. When seismic waves from a distant earthquake rippled through the ground and reached the urn, they set the heavy internal mass swinging. It was an inertial pendulum designed to stay relatively still while the world moved around it. This motion would trigger only one of the 8 levers, the one aligned with the direction from which the shockwaves came. That lever would tilt, dislodging a catch, and cause the corresponding dragon to release its bronze ball. The device did not just detect shaking, it performed a calculation. It identified the epicenter's bearing. Think of trying to sense the direction of a far-off sound by feeling which window pane in your house vibrates the most. Zhang Heng's seismoscope did precisely that for the movements of the Earth itself. It translated invisible, silent forces into a clear, audible, and visual signal that anyone could understand. A single clang of bronze announced a truth that no human eye could see. For a civilization plagued by unpredictable earthquakes, this was more than a scientific toy. It was an early warning system. A report from a dragon's mouth could allow the emperor to send aid to a stricken region days before a messenger on a tired horse could even arrive. It turned a mysterious act of nature into a measurable event. How many lives might have been saved by the timely clang of that bronze ball? That single clang of bronze was a voice from the deep earth, but another invention sought to give voice to the heavens themselves. In the 11th century, during the Song dynasty, a brilliant official named Su Song engineered a tower that was a city within a city, a mechanical cosmos made of wood and bronze. Rising over 40 feet into the air, his astronomical clock tower was not merely a timekeeper. It was a universe in motion, a grand orrery that plotted the paths of stars and planets with breathtaking precision. Its heart was a massive water wheel, a relentless engine powered by a constant flow of liquid. But this was no simple mill wheel. It incorporated a revolutionary device known as an escapement mechanism, a system of catches and releases that transformed a steady, pouring force into a series of tiny, measured ticks. This ingenious brake tamed the raw power of flowing water, allowing the tower's complex gear trains to advance in precise, controlled increments. It was the same principle that would govern every mechanical clock built in Europe, but here it was, fully realized centuries earlier. The tower was a symphony of synchronized motion. At the top, a celestial globe intricately carved with constellations, rotated in perfect time with the actual night sky. Below it, a procession of automated figures would emerge from hidden doors to ring bells and strike gongs, announcing the passing hours and quarters. And on the tower's face, a complex array of dials and indicators displayed the time of day, the day of the month, and the position of specific stars. For the emperor and his court, this was the ultimate instrument of cosmic order. It demonstrated that the rhythms of the heavens were not mysterious and untouchable, but could be understood, measured, and even replicated by human hands. The clock tower was a physical calendar, an astronomical calculator, and a public spectacle all in one. It ran for decades, a testament to the durability of its design and the skill of its builders. How does a civilization build a machine to track time itself, and what does it say about their view of the universe? The answer lies in the silent, patient logic of its gears, a mathematics carved in wood that sought to mirror the mathematics of the cosmos. The silent mathematics of the cosmos was matched only by the roaring fires of the earthly forge. While one tower tracked the stars, another kind of creation was happening at an industrial scale, a process that turned metal into monuments. Deep within royal foundries, artisans perfected a technology so advanced it would define an entire age, the art of bronze casting. Their masterpiece was the Humuwu Ding, a colossal ritual cauldron weighing over 1,800 pounds. This was not merely a large pot, it was a symbol of imperial power cast in a single, breathtaking piece of bronze. Creating something so massive and so intricately detailed required a genius for both chemistry and engineering, a forgotten science of fire and metal. The method was known as the lost wax process, a technique of sublime cleverness. First, a full-scale model of the vessel would be sculpted from clay. Over this core, artisans would carefully build up a layer of beeswax, carving every fine line and mythical creature into its soft surface. This wax model was then covered in more clay, creating a sturdy outer mold. The entire assembly was baked in a fiery pit. As the heat intensified, the wax would melt and drain out through specially designed channels, leaving behind a perfect hollow negative space between the two clay layers. This was the moment of truth. Molten bronze, heated to a searing temperature in giant furnaces, was poured into the cavity left by the vanished wax. The metal flowed into every carved groove, capturing the smallest details of the original artist's design. Once the bronze cooled and solidified, the outer clay mold was broken away, revealing the magnificent vessel within. This single piece of metal now carried the precise image of the wax that had been sacrificed to create it. But the magic was not just in the shape, it was in the substance itself. These ancient metallurgists were master chemists. They did not work with pure copper, which is soft and prone to cracking when cast in such large volumes. Instead, they developed precise alloy formulas, typically mixing copper with tin and sometimes lead. The tin made the bronze harder and stronger, while the lead lowered its melting point, making the liquid metal flow more easily into the finest details of the mold. The result was a material perfectly tuned for its purpose, strong enough to withstand the casting process and durable enough to last for millennia. The surface of the Humuwu Ding is covered in fierce Tauti masks and stylized dragons, patterns that required immense skill to carve in wax and even greater skill to cast in metal. The sheer volume of bronze needed for such a project speaks to an industrial operation. Multiple furnaces would have been fired simultaneously, with teams of workers managing the flow of fuel and air to maintain the intense heat required. The pouring of the metal would have been a carefully choreographed ballet of danger and precision. One mistake, one cold spot in the mold, and the entire piece could be ruined. These vessels were more than art, they were the ultimate symbols of authority, used in sacred ceremonies to communicate with ancestral spirits. The ability to command such a complex technological process, from mining the ore to the final spectacular casting, demonstrated a ruler's control over both nature and society. How does a civilization learn to speak the language of fire and metal so fluently? The answer is etched into the surface of every surviving ding, a testament to the chemical knowledge and logistical might of the ancient Chinese workshop. That same mastery of metal and motion was not confined to tracking time on Earth. It reached for the stars themselves. Zhang Heng, the mind behind the earthquake detector, also gazed upward, constructing a cosmic model of breathtaking complexity. His armillary sphere was a skeleton of the heavens, a celestial globe made from a series of interlocking bronze rings. Each ring represented a fundamental circle in the sky. One ring stood for the horizon, the boundary between land and sky. Another captured the meridian, the great arc passing directly overhead from north to south. And the most crucial ring of all traced the path of the ecliptic, the sun's apparent journey through the constellations over the course of a year. This was not a simple ornament. It was a working astronomical computer, a physical framework for mapping the precise coordinates of every star and planet. A skilled observer could use sighting tubes mounted on the rings to take measurements, noting a star's position against these fixed celestial lines. By tracking these positions night after night, year after year, Chinese astronomers could detect the subtle drift of the planets against the backdrop of fixed stars. They could predict eclipses and plot the moon's wandering path, all without a single lens or telescope. How do you map a universe you can only see with the naked eye? You build a model of its very rules. The armillary sphere made the abstract geometry of the cosmos tangible. Think of it as a three-dimensional graph paper for the sky, where every celestial body had a defined address. This precision was the bedrock of the Chinese calendar, a document of profound importance that synchronized human affairs with the rhythms of nature. The calendar dictated the timing of planting and harvests, of religious festivals and imperial ceremonies. Its accuracy was seen as a sign of the emperor's divine mandate to rule. A miscalculation could mean famine, social unrest, or a loss of heavenly favor. So the work of astronomers like Zhang Heng, supported by instruments of stunning accuracy, was a matter of state security. They were not merely stargazers, they were the keepers of time and order for an entire civilization. Their armillary spheres turned the chaotic spray of night lights into a predictable, measurable clockwork, proving that the universe, for all its vastness, could be understood through rings of bronze and human genius. The same mastery that charted the stars was also directed deep into the earth in a quest for a different kind of power. While astronomers mapped the heavens, engineers were plumbing depths that would not be matched in the West for over 1,000 years. They were drilling for natural gas. In the misty, brine-rich regions of Sichuan, bamboo derricks rose over the landscape like skeletal forests. These were not simple wells. Teams of workers would leverage massive iron bits suspended by bamboo cables from a rocking lever and drop them repeatedly into the ground. This was percussive drilling, a relentless hammering that could bore holes over 3,000 feet deep, straight through solid rock. The process was slow and perilous, a feat of endurance and ingenuity. As the drill bit chewed its way downward, workers lowered hollow bamboo pipes to case the borehole, preventing collapses and channeling the mysterious forces below. What they were seeking was a ghostly fuel, a flammable gas that seeped from the Earth's depths. When a drill team finally struck a pocket of this gas, the real transformation began. They would cap the wellhead and construct extensive networks of bamboo pipelines, joints sealed with lacquer to make them airtight. This primitive gas grid carried the invisible resource for miles across the countryside, all to fuel a single, vital industry, salt production. At the evaporation works, the gas was piped directly to rows of boiling pans where brine from other wells was heated. The steady, controllable flame allowed for a continuous, large-scale operation, turning the precious brine into mounds of pure white salt. This was an industrial complex of staggering sophistication, a fully integrated system that linked deep earth extraction to final product manufacturing. It was a solution born of necessity, as the region's scarce firewood could never have supported such a massive demand for heat. How many centuries of observation and experimentation did it take to connect a mysterious underground fire to the practical need for preserving food? This was not a discovery of chance, but of deliberate, systematic engineering. The salt works of ancient China were factories in the truest sense, powered by a fossil fuel extracted with breathtaking ambition, all while Europe was still in its feudal age. But that mastery of water required more than just deep wells. It demanded a way to move it across the land. across the vast terraced hillsides of southern China, another invention turned the earth green, a machine that gave water the power to climb. The chain pump was a deceptively simple device, a continuous loop of wooden boards connected by iron links. This endless belt, turned by a foot pedal or a rotating wheel, would dip into a lower canal or river. As it rose, each square board carried a pocket of water upward within a wooden trough, only to tip it out at the top into an irrigation ditch. It was a mechanical staircase for liquid, lifting it steadily from lowlands to high fields. This relentless cyclical motion transformed agriculture. For the first time, farmers could cultivate rice on a massive scale across steep, terraced mountainsides. The chain pump did not rely on the unpredictable flow of rivers or the back-breaking labor of carrying water by hand. It was a constant, reliable force, a machine that could be operated by one or two people to irrigate entire slopes. Think of a giant, gentle escalator where every step is a small wooden bucket endlessly ascending. This simple principle of a moving chain and paddles became the lifeblood of southern China, enabling the intensive rice cultivation that would feed immense populations for centuries. How many millions were sustained by the rhythmic, splashing turn of that wooden chain? It was a quiet revolution in hydraulic engineering, one that turned arid hills into lush, productive paddies, proving that the most profound technologies are often those that work in harmony with the land, lifting life itself from one level to the next. While that wooden chain lifted water to feed millions, another invention was capturing the very thoughts that guided the empire. Advanced paper-making transformed whispers of wisdom into permanent records, creating a medium that would outlast stone and silk. The Chinese process was a meticulous alchemy of plant and patience, beginning with humble materials like mulberry bark, old hemp ropes, and discarded rags. Workers would first boil these fibrous scraps in a lye solution for hours, breaking them down into a pulpy mass. This soggy mixture was then transferred to a large stone vat and beaten relentlessly with wooden mallets until each fiber separated, suspended in water to form a thick, soupy slurry. The true magic happened with the mold, a flexible screen made from fine bamboo strips stitched together with horsehair. A skilled craftsman would dip this rectangular frame into the vat, lifting it out with a deft, shaking motion that distributed the fibers evenly across its surface. As the water drained away, it left behind a delicate, interwoven mat of plant cellulose, the ghost of a future sheet of paper. This wet sheet was then carefully pressed between layers of felt to squeeze out the remaining moisture before being peeled away and brushed onto a heated wall to dry. The result was a material of astonishing strength and smoothness, a surface ideal for both the delicate strokes of a calligraphy brush and the sharp impressions of a woodblock print. This was not like brittle papyrus, which cracked along its natural stems, or heavy parchment, which was laborious to produce from animal skins. This was a thin, uniform, and remarkably durable sheet, a democratizing force for knowledge. For centuries, the exact methods for creating this superior paper were a closely guarded state secret, a technological advantage as valuable as any weapon. It was only through the slow movement of people and goods along the Silk Road that the knowledge eventually drifted westward, changing the world forever. How many of history's greatest ideas would have been lost without this perfect, portable surface to carry them? That perfect paper required a fire hot enough to dry it, but the forges of ancient China demanded something far more intense. To produce the high-quality cast iron for their monumental cauldrons and intricate tools, they needed a relentless, roaring heat, a feat achieved by a deceptively simple-looking device, the double-action piston bellows. This was not a simple bag squeezed by hand. It was a mechanical lung, an air pump of brilliant efficiency that could maintain a continuous blast of oxygen into a furnace. Imagine a wooden cylinder with a tightly fitted piston inside. As a worker pushed the piston handle forward, it compressed the air ahead of it, forcing that air out through a nozzle and into the fire. But the true genius was in the return stroke. When the worker pulled the piston back, it did not simply suck in new air from behind. Instead, a clever system of internal valves and a second chamber came into play. The backward motion created a vacuum that opened an intake valve, drawing fresh air into the space behind the piston. Simultaneously, air that had been drawn in on the previous cycle was now compressed and forced out of a second outlet. This meant that both the push and the pull of the piston were actively pumping air. There was no dead motion, no pause in the airflow. It was a constant, rhythmic blast that fed the inferno. This steady supply of oxygen was the key to reaching the extreme temperatures, well over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, needed to melt iron ore completely and pour it into molds. Without such a device, furnaces would starve for air, their heat fluctuating and unable to achieve the clean, liquid state required for fine casting. The double-action bellows turned sporadic flames into a sustained, industrial-grade fire. It was the mechanical heartbeat of the entire bronze and iron industry, enabling the mass production of farm tools, weapons, and the magnificent ritual vessels that defined an era. How does a civilization learn to breathe life into fire itself? With every push and pull of that wooden handle, they were not just moving air, they were mastering the very element that transforms rock into metal, fueling a technological ascent that would shape the world. The same invisible force that lifted paper into the air also lifted soldiers into the sky. Long before they were children's toys, kites were sophisticated instruments of war, their silk sails and bamboo frames serving as strategic tools for ancient Chinese generals. In the hands of a military tactician, a kite was a communication network, a surveying tool, and the world's first unmanned aerial vehicle. Their silent flight offered a perspective once reserved for birds, turning the battlefield from a flat, chaotic plain into a map of clear opportunity and threat. One of the most critical uses was for signaling across vast distances. Armies stretched for miles, and coordinating movements between separate divisions was a monumental challenge. A large kite flown to a great height could be seen from much farther away than a flag or a smoke signal. Specific patterns of colored streamers or a series of deliberate tugs on the line could convey complex messages, such as an order to advance, retreat, or change formation. This was an early form of semaphore, a silent language written on the wind that bypassed the need for vulnerable messengers on horseback. How many battle plans were executed flawlessly because of a simple piece of silk dancing in the sky? The kite also became a precise tool for measurement. When a general needed to know the exact distance to an enemy fortress wall or the width of a river his army had to cross, he could employ a kite with mathematical certainty. A kite would be flown directly over the target, its string pulled taut. By measuring the length of the string let out and the angle it made with the ground, and then applying the principles of trigonometry, military engineers could calculate distances with remarkable accuracy. This was reconnaissance without risk, a way to gather vital intelligence long before any soldier had to set foot in harm's way. But the most daring application was for human observation. Historical records, including the military treatise of the strategist Mosey, describe kites large and sturdy enough to lift a man. These were not flights for amusement, they were perilous reconnaissance missions. A carefully selected soldier, often the lightest and bravest in the unit, would be harnessed to a giant kite. Launched from a high hill or a favorable wind, he would be carried aloft to spy on enemy positions. From his airborne perch, he could count troop numbers, observe fortification layouts, and track supply lines, information that could decide the outcome of an entire campaign. One legendary account tells of a general who used a kite to measure the distance to a palace wall his troops were tunneling under, ensuring his sappers dug with perfect precision. Another story describes a besieged commander who used a kite to send a distress message over the heads of his enemies, calling for reinforcements. These were not myths, they were documented tactics in an era of profound ingenuity. The kite transformed the very nature of warfare, proving that the key to victory could sometimes be found not in strength, but in elevation, in the simple, ancient act of harnessing the wind to see what others could not. Deep in a tomb sealed for over 2,000 years, a silent orchestra waited. When archaeologists opened the burial chamber of Marquis of Zheng, they found not just treasure, but a complete musical universe cast in bronze. 65 magnificent bells hung from ornate stands, each one a masterpiece of acoustic engineering. These were not simple noisemakers, they were precision instruments, and their secret was one that would stump modern musicians for years. Every single bell was crafted to produce two distinct, perfectly tuned musical notes. Strike it in the center, and you would hear one clear tone. Strike it near the rim, just a few inches away, and you would hear a different one, a specific interval like a fourth or a fifth apart. This was no accident of casting. It was the result of a lost science of sound and metal. The shape of each bell was critical. They were not circular like Western bells, but rather formed in a peculiar oval cross-section. This unique shape, with its flattened sides and carefully calculated curves, created two separate vibrational modes within the same piece of bronze. The metal was thicker in some areas and thinner in others, a pattern that guided the sound waves along two different paths. When the striker hit the central point, one set of vibrations dominated. When he struck the off-center point, an entirely different set took over, producing that second pure note. The metallurgy itself was a miracle of consistency. The bronze alloy had to be perfectly uniform, free of the impurities and bubbles that would distort the sound. The founders who made these bells possessed a knowledge we can only reconstruct with advanced computer modeling today. They understood that a bell was not just an object, but a complex acoustic system. Tuning them required a painstaking process of scraping and filing the interior walls, shaving off minute amounts of metal to raise or lower the pitch of each tone until it locked perfectly into the scale. The entire set covered a range of 5 octaves, a testament to the mathematical understanding of its creators. This was a scale, a system of harmony, built into 65 physical objects. The set could play the same complex melodies and harmonies we associate with a modern orchestra. Imagine the sound in that ancient court, a rich tapestry of music woven from these dual-toned bells, a harmony so advanced it would not be rivaled for over a millennium. What kind of civilization could build a machine not for war or work, but for the pure, intricate expression of sound? The answer is etched into the very shape of the bronze, a permanent echo of a culture that tuned metal to sing with 2 voices. These dual-toned bells revealed a culture obsessed with harmony, but that same drive for precision and spectacle found another outlet in pure theatrical wonder. Within the secluded gardens of the imperial palace, guests would gather around a towering, multi-story pavilion, its interior humming with the sound of flowing water. This was no simple fountain, it was a mechanical theater, a world of automated actors and self-playing instruments. A hidden water wheel, much like the one in Su Song's clock tower, served as the heart of the entire performance. As the wheel turned, it engaged a complex assembly of trip hammers, levers, rotating shafts, and pulling cords. This was the programming language of the automaton, a physical system that dictated every movement and sound. On a small stage, doors would swing open on their own to reveal carved wooden figures. Musicians, their arms connected to internal mechanisms, would appear to strum lutes or strike drums in a perfect, rhythmic sequence. Acrobats would somersault, and dancers would twirl in an endless, graceful loop. The entire scene was a preordained drama, a story told without a single human performer on stage. The water flow was the conductor, its relentless power passed and divided by the gears into the precise timing required for the spectacle. A faster flow might speed up the entire sequence, while a cleverly placed reservoir could act as a delay, creating a pause for dramatic effect. These automata were more than just clever toys, they were early robots, demonstrating a complete understanding of programmed motion and kinetic storytelling. They were the blockbuster films of their day, a fusion of art and engineering designed to awe and delight the most powerful people in the empire. What does it say about a civilization that it could build machines not just for labor, but for the sole purpose of creating joy and wonder? The answer played out on that tiny, water-powered stage, a silent performance of levers and gears that brought wood and paint to life. That same drive to map the heavens was matched by an ambition to chart the world underfoot. Long before the age of exploration, Chinese cartographers were drafting the land with a mathematician's eye, creating maps of stunning accuracy. They did not rely on guesswork or artistic license. They used a grid system, a simple but revolutionary concept that transformed geography into a science. A single sheet of silk or paper would be overlaid with a uniform grid of squares, each one representing a fixed unit of distance on the ground. A cartographer would then plot every mountain, river, and town within this precise coordinate system. The result was a map drawn to scale, where you could measure the true distance between two cities by simply counting the squares between them and multiplying. This was a radical departure from the symbolic, often distorted maps of the medieval world. It was a functional tool for administration, taxation, and military logistics, giving the imperial court a true understanding of the empire it governed. One of the most remarkable examples of this precision was carved not on silk but in stone. The Yu Jai Tu, or Map of the Tracks of Yu the Great, was etched into a stone stele in the 12th century. It depicts China with an incredible level of detail, showing a network of rivers, the jagged lines of mountain ranges, and over 500 individually named settlements. The entire coastline is rendered with an accuracy that would not be seen in European maps for hundreds of years. This was not a decorative piece, it was a permanent public record of the known world, a testament to a civilization that believed the land itself could be understood through numbers and lines. How do you govern a vast empire without ever seeing most of it? You build a miniature version on a grid, a mathematical portrait of your domain that fits on a single sheet. Every square was a promise that the world was knowable, measurable, and ultimately manageable. Mastering the land required more than just watering it. The very act of planting, once a haphazard scattering of seeds by hand, was transformed by a mechanical marvel of the 6th century, the multi-tube seed drill. This was not a simple plow. It was a precision instrument, a wooden box on wheels that fed individual seeds directly into the earth at a controlled depth and perfect spacing. A single ox pulled the drill forward, and as its wheels turned, they engaged a series of gears that rotated a mechanism inside the seed hopper. This mechanism would release seeds at a steady, predetermined rate. Below the hopper, several hollow tubes like metallic roots guided each seed down into narrow furrows that had been opened by a share at the front of the device. A small blade would then cover the seed with just the right amount of soil. The entire process was a continuous, automated symphony of motion. Every seed was placed at the ideal depth for germination, protected from birds and the elements. Every sprout was given its own defined space, eliminating the brutal competition for sunlight and nutrients that choked traditional broadcast fields. This precise spacing allowed farmers to weed between the orderly rows, a simple task that was impossible in a tangled mess of randomly scattered crops. The result was a dramatic surge in yield from the same plot of land. Where a farmer might have used a full sack of seed to sow a field by hand, the drill could achieve the same coverage with only a fraction of that amount because not a single seed was wasted. This was agricultural efficiency on an industrial scale, a revolution that turned scarcity into plenty. How many generations of hunger were averted by the simple, rhythmic click of that seed drill's gears? It was a machine that thought for the plant, ensuring each one had the perfect start in life. A technological guardian that walked the fields long before the first green shoot ever saw the sun. High above the roaring rivers and dizzying gorges of southwestern China, trade routes did not detour, they simply ascended. Iron chain suspension bridges spanned chasms that would have stopped any caravan in its tracks, their roadways swaying gently in the mountain winds. These were not crude rope and plank crossings, but feats of civil engineering that transformed the most impassable terrain into a conduit for commerce and culture. The heart of the bridge was its chains, massive links hand forged from iron, each one a solid ring interlocked with the next to form a continuous, flexible band of metal. These chains were not merely draped across the gap, they were the product of a sophisticated understanding of load and tension. Workers would first fire a thin, lightweight guide rope across the gorge, often using a giant crossbow or a kite. This initial line would then be used to pull progressively heavier ropes until finally, the immense weight of the iron chains could be hauled across, link by grueling link. The true genius, however, lay at the ends of the bridge, in the anchorage systems buried deep within the solid rock of the canyon walls. The chains were not simply tied to a tree or a post. They were anchored into massive stone piers, often with the links splayed out and secured within labyrinthine tunnels carved into the bedrock. This distributed the immense force of the bridge's load over a vast area of stone, preventing a catastrophic failure. The bridge deck itself, made of wooden planks, was then suspended from these primary chains by a network of smaller vertical iron links. This design created a structure that was both incredibly strong and remarkably flexible, able to absorb the shocks of wind, the weight of a loaded caravan, and even the subtle shifting of the earth. A bridge like the famous Anlin Bridge in Sichuan stretched for over 1,000 feet, a silk thread of iron and wood unspooled across a void. For the merchants, pilgrims, and soldiers who crossed them, these bridges were more than a convenience, they were a necessity. They linked remote communities to the imperial heartland, allowing for the flow of salt, tea, and silk. They enabled armies to move with speed through otherwise defensible mountain passes. The gentle sway of the walkway was not a sign of weakness, but a proof of its brilliant engineering, a flexible strength that could withstand forces a rigid structure would shatter against. How many fortunes and futures were carried safely across on those iron rings? Each crossing was a silent tribute to the metallurgists who forged the chains and the engineers who dared to tether one mountain to another. A delicate cup sits in a museum, its surface a deep, luminous black that seems to swallow the light. It feels impossibly smooth, almost liquid to the touch, and it has looked this way for over 2,000 years. This is not painted wood, it is lacquerware, a material born from one of the most perilous and precise chemical processes of the ancient world. Its creation began with a raw material as dangerous as it was magical, the sap of the Toxicodendron vernicifluum, the lacquer tree. In its liquid form, this sap is a potent neurotoxin, capable of inflicting painful, blistering rashes on the skin of any unseasoned artisan. Harvesting it was a ritual of immense care, a slow tap into the tree's veins to collect the precious grayish liquid. But this toxic sap held a secret. It was a natural polymer waiting for a catalyst. The moment it was exposed to the humidity of the air, a complex chemical transformation began. The sap would slowly harden from a liquid into an incredibly tough, durable plastic-like coating, a shield that was impervious to water, acid, and even alcohol. The challenge was to control this reaction, to tame the poison and turn it into art. The first step was purification. The raw sap was strained, heated, and stirred to remove impurities and adjust its viscosity. This was a delicate operation, as too much heat could ruin its binding properties. Once prepared, the real artistry could begin. A base object, usually made of lightweight wood or cloth, would receive its first of many coats. Artisans used specialized brushes to apply a layer as thin as a whisper, a process requiring a steady hand and a controlled environment. The freshly coated piece was then placed into a critical piece of technology, a humidifying chamber. This was not merely a damp room, it was a carefully engineered microclimate. The hardening of lacquer is an enzymatic process that requires a very specific range of humidity, typically between 80 and 90%. In a chamber that was too dry, the lacquer would not cure properly, remaining tacky and soft. In one that was too wet, the surface would become cloudy and lose its legendary luster. These chambers were the secret laboratories of the lacquerware workshop, where temperature and moisture were managed with the precision of a modern scientific instrument. After days of slow curing in the humid air, the first layer would be fully hardened. Then the artisan would begin again, sanding the surface to a perfect smoothness and applying the next micro-thin coat. A single piece of high-quality lacquerware could require 30, 50, or even more of these successive layers. This painstaking, months-long process built up a composite material of incredible resilience, a shield that could flex with the wood underneath without cracking or peeling. The true masterwork, however, was in the decoration. Some pieces were inlaid with mother-of-pearl, whose iridescent scenes seemed to float in the deep, dark gloss. Others were carved, with artisans cutting intricate patterns through the many-colored layers to reveal a rainbow hiding beneath the surface. The most astonishing technique was gold and silver painting, where designs were drawn with pigments mixed with lacquer onto the final layer. Once this decoration was complete, the entire piece received one last, perfectly clear coat, sealing the art for eternity. A single piece was a chronicle of a year's labor, a testament to patience and chemical mastery. How did they discover that a tree's poisonous blood could be transformed into an eternal shell? The answer lies in the luminous surface of that ancient cup, a material science so advanced it defies the centuries. That deep black lacquer preserved more than just cups. It sealed a culinary secret that would feed empires. While artisans perfected their humidified chambers, another kind of workshop was dedicated to a different kind of craft, the mass production of food itself. Inside bustling kitchens that served entire cities, mechanical noodle makers transformed simple flour and water into endless ribbons of sustenance. These were not simple hand-pulled operations, but sophisticated machines of wood and bronze that automated the entire process from dough to finished pasta. At the heart of the device was a large hopper filled with wheat or rice flour. A worker would pour water into the mix, and with the turn of a crank, a series of interlocking gears would set two heavy wooden rollers in motion. These rollers, pressing against each other with immense force, would knead the mixture into a smooth, elastic dough. This was the first critical step, mechanical kneading, which ensured a perfect, uniform consistency every single time, a consistency that hand kneading could never guarantee on such a scale. But the true innovation came next. The same crank power was transferred to a piston or a screw mechanism that forced this perfectly kneaded dough through a die, a perforated metal plate at the front of the machine. These dies were interchangeable, each one carved with a specific pattern of holes. A die with round holes would produce thin, spaghetti-like noodles. One with wider, flatter slits would create the broad, belt-like strands of a noodle we might call pappardelle today. Some machines even had a cutting system where the extruded strands would pass under a rapidly oscillating blade, chopping them into uniform length. This was an assembly line for carbohydrates, a proto-industrial food factory that could churn out consistent, high-quality noodles at a rate unimaginable for a lone cook. The variety was staggering, from thin vermicelli to thick, chewy udon, all determined by the simple swap of a bronze plate. This technology appeared in China as early as the 3rd or 4th century, a full millennium before similar pasta extrusion devices were documented in Italy. It was a solution to the problem of feeding dense urban populations and massive imperial armies on the move. A supply wagon could carry compact sacks of flour, and a single machine operated by a few soldiers could produce fresh noodles for thousands by nightfall. How many campaigns were sustained by the steady, rhythmic cranking of that wooden machine? It turned the act of cooking into a form of engineering, proving that the most fundamental human need for food could be met with the same mechanical genius that charted the stars and spanned gorges. While noodles fed the empire on land, its true power stretched across the waves. Chinese shipwrights engineered vessels that were not just boats, but floating fortresses of trade and technology built to conquer the oceans. Their most crucial innovation was hidden below deck, a simple idea that saved countless ships and lives: the watertight bulkhead. Instead of a single, vast cargo hold, the hull was divided by a series of solid wooden walls, creating separate, sealed compartments. If the ship struck a rock or sprung a leak in one section, only that single compartment would flood. The rest of the vessel would remain buoyant, allowing it to limp to safety for repairs. This was a fundamental shift in naval architecture. A European ship with a breached hull was often a total loss, its single cavity quickly filling with water. A Chinese junk with its compartmentalized body could survive disasters that would send other vessels to the bottom. Think of it as a honeycomb where a breach in one cell does not doom the entire structure. This design also served a dual purpose, allowing different cargoes like porcelain and tea to be stored separately and securely within the same ship. But a sturdy hull was useless without precise control. While Western ships relied on cumbersome steering oars lashed to the sides, Chinese engineers perfected the stern-mounted rudder. This single, massive blade was fixed vertically to the ship's sternpost, right in the center line of the vessel. Connected to a tiller or a wheel, it gave the helmsman unprecedented command. A slight turn of the rudder would pivot the entire ship around a central axis, allowing for incredibly tight maneuvering in crowded harbors and swift course corrections in heavy seas. This central pivot point was far more efficient than a side-mounted oar, which had to fight the water to drag the ship's stern around. The combination of a compartmentalized hull and a stern rudder created a ship that was both resilient and highly responsive, a cargo carrier that could also be a nimble explorer. And then there were the sails. The Chinese junk did not use the simple square sails common in the Mediterranean. Its masts carried fully battened sails, a lattice of bamboo strips that gave the canvas a permanent, aerodynamically efficient shape. These sails were like the wings of a bird, able to be trimmed and adjusted with a complexity that baffled European sailors. A single sailor could raise or lower these heavy sails using the ship's internal winches, and the battens prevented the canvas from flapping uselessly in the wind. Most remarkably, these sails were so efficient that a junk could sail almost directly into the wind, a point of sail that would leave a square-rigged vessel dead in the water. A massive treasure ship from the voyages of Admiral Zheng, he might have had 9 masts and dozens of these sophisticated sails, a floating forest of bamboo and cloth that could carry thousands of tons of cargo and hundreds of people across the Indian Ocean. These were not just ships, they were the engines of a global network carrying silk, spices, and technologies that would reshape the world. How many empires were built on the back of a compartmentalized hull and a perfectly angled sail? These wind-powered carriages seemed to defy the very logic of the land. On the vast, flat plains of northern China, enormous wheeled wagons, some large enough to carry a dozen people, would glide across the earth without a single ox or horse pulling them. They moved with an eerie silence, propelled by a force that filled the sails mounted on their sturdy wooden masts. European missionaries who witnessed these land sail wagons in the 16th century wrote home with astonished reports, describing carriages that harnessed the wind itself to race across the open ground at speeds that outpaced a galloping horse. This was not a whimsical experiment, it was a practical and widespread mode of transportation, a solution to the challenge of moving goods and people across immense, featureless landscapes where animal power was expensive and fodder was scarce. The design was a masterpiece of adaptation. The wagons had broad, solid wheels to keep them from sinking into soft soil, and their sails were fully battened, just like those on the great ocean-going junks, giving them the same ability to catch the wind from almost any direction. A skilled pilot could tack against the wind, zigzagging his way across the plain with the same principles a sailor used on the water. The largest of these vehicles were said to be multi-masted, veritable land ships capable of carrying immense loads of grain or salt. For the farmers and merchants of the plains, this was freedom. A single favorable wind could carry a week's worth of travel in a single, exhilarating day. The entire system was a testament to a culture that saw a resource everywhere it looked. Why burn fuel or feed animals when the sky itself offered an endless, clean propulsion? The wind that filled the sails of the treasure ships in the southern seas was the very same wind that drove these carriages across the northern deserts, a single, unified understanding of an invisible power harnessed for both sea and land. How many journeys were completed, how many markets supplied by these silent, rolling ships of the plains? The wind that propelled carriages across the plains was a gentle force compared to the contained infernos of the imperial kilns. Here, in workshops shrouded in secrecy, artisans mastered a transformation more magical than any automaton, turning common clay into a material as luminous as jade and as resonant as a bell. This was porcelain, and its creation was a high-stakes dance of chemistry, physics, and fire. The journey began not with fire, but with earth. Artisans sought out the purest kaolin clay, a fine, white primary clay that was remarkably refractory, meaning it could withstand immense heat without deforming. This was mixed with petunci, a feldspathic rock that, when fired, would vitrify, melting into a glassy matrix that bonded the clay particles into a single, non-porous mass. The quality of the final piece depended entirely on the purity of this mixture, a recipe perfected over centuries and guarded as closely as any state secret. The clay was then shaped on potter's wheels, its soft form coaxed into elegant vases, delicate bowls, and intricate figurines. But the true test, the moment of alchemy, happened within the kiln. These were not simple ovens, they were colossal, multi-chambered structures, often built into the slopes of hills to create a natural draft. The dragon kiln, sometimes stretching over 100 feet long, was a beast of fire and air. Its design was a masterpiece of thermal engineering. The firing chamber was at the lowest point, with successive chambers rising up the incline. As heat from the wood fire below roared through the structure, each chamber reached a slightly different temperature, allowing a single firing to produce a range of wares with different hardness and finish. Controlling this inferno was the ultimate skill. Kiln masters, the undisputed wizards of the workshop, judged temperature not with instruments but with their eyes. They would watch the color of the flame and the glow of the kiln's interior, knowing that a cherry red meant one temperature and a brilliant orange yellow meant another. They used specially designed clay cones placed inside the kiln, which would bend and melt at specific heats, giving a visual signal that the desired temperature, often well over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, had been reached. This was a sustained, even heat that had to be maintained for days, a relentless vigil that could not waver. A single mistake in the firing cycle, a draft at the wrong moment, or a drop in temperature could ruin an entire month's labor, turning potential masterpieces into worthless, cracked pottery. The final layer of magic was the glaze. These were not simple paints, but complex chemical soups of minerals ground into a fine slurry. Cobalt oxide from Persia produced the deep, brilliant blue of classic Ming ware. Copper could yield a stunning ox blood red or a subtle celadon green, depending on the kiln's atmosphere. The application was an art in itself. Pieces were dipped, brushed, or sprayed with the liquid glaze, each method leaving a signature texture. Then the piece was fired again. In the kiln's intense heat, the glaze ingredients would melt into a thin layer of glass, fusing permanently to the clay body beneath. The most revered pieces, like King by ware, were so thin and translucent that light would pass through them, glowing with an ethereal inner light. Tapping one with a fingernail produced a clear, ringing tone, a sign of its perfect vitrification and lack of flaws. For centuries, the exact methods for creating this translucent, resonant treasure were a state monopoly. The imperial factories at Jingdezhen were a fortress of knowledge, their techniques protected from foreign spies on pain of death. The porcelain that eventually made its way to Europe was so prized that it was valued like gold, a tangible piece of a distant, impossibly sophisticated civilization. How did they learn to speak the language of fire and earth with such fluency? The answer is held in the smooth, cool surface of a porcelain vase, a silent symphony of chemistry and control that turned mud into moonlight. That same genius for engineering extended from the soaring bridges of iron to the delicate pathways of the orchard. In the lush citrus groves of southern China, farmers faced an invisible enemy, swarms of destructive beetles and caterpillars that could decimate an entire season's fruit. Their solution was not a chemical spray, but a living, crawling army. They recruited an unlikely ally, the weaver ant, a fiercely territorial insect known for its painful bite and its voracious appetite for other insects. This was not a random discovery, it was a deliberate, managed ecosystem. The farmers would venture into the forests to collect entire nests of these aggressive ants, carefully transporting them back to their groves. But simply releasing the ants was not enough. To ensure their tiny protectors could patrol every branch and leaf the growers built for them, they constructed intricate aerial highways, tying slender bamboo canes between the limbs of adjacent trees, and even smearing the bark with sticky substances to guide the ants' movement and prevent them from wandering to the ground. These fragile-looking bridges created a continuous, elevated network, allowing the ant colonies to spread throughout the entire orchard as a single, coordinated defense force. The ants would swarm over the citrus trees, relentlessly hunting down any pest that dared to land. They devoured the larvae of borers, cleared away scale insects, and drove off larger beetles, all while leaving the precious fruit completely untouched. This was biological warfare on a miniature scale, a self-sustaining security system that required no replenishment beyond the occasional repair of a bamboo bridge. The farmers had turned a potential pest into their greatest protector, understanding the balance of nature in a way that modern agriculture is only now rediscovering. How many harvests were saved by the coordinated march of these six-legged guardians? This was integrated pest management, a concept we think of as modern, practiced with stunning sophistication over 1,000 years ago. It was a technology not of metal but of life itself, a quiet partnership between human ingenuity and the natural world. While artisans perfected their glazes and farmers managed their ants, a quieter revolution was unfolding on the desks of imperial scholars. They were solving complex equations with a tool of elegant simplicity, a set of counting rods. These small sticks made from bamboo, bone, or ivory were not just for tallying. They were the physical components of an entire mathematical language, a system that gave ancient China a computational power Europe would not grasp for 1,000 years. The true genius was not in the rods themselves, but in the grid upon which they were placed, a calculating board that functioned as a physical computer. This grid implemented a decimal place value system that was both intuitive and breathtakingly powerful. A rod placed in one column represented a single unit. The same rod moved one column to the left suddenly represented 10 units. Move it again, and it became 100. This allowed mathematicians to represent enormous numbers and perform calculations with an efficiency that Roman numerals, with their cumbersome letters and lack of a zero, could never achieve. But the innovation went even further. They used color to introduce a concept that would terrify European mathematicians for centuries: negative numbers. Red rods signified positive quantities, while black rods represented negative ones. Placing a black rod in the tens column and a red rod in the units column created a number like -32. This was not abstract theory, it was a practical tool for balancing ledgers, where debts could be clearly subtracted from assets right on the board. The process of calculation was a dynamic, almost choreographed performance. To add two numbers, you would simply combine the rods in each column. If the rods in a single column totaled more than 10, you would carry over the excess to the next higher column, a mechanical process that mirrored the arithmetic we learn today. Subtraction worked in reverse, sometimes requiring you to borrow from a higher column. For multiplication and division, the mathematician would set up the problem across multiple rows of the grid, using the rods to keep track of partial products and remainders. They could even extract square and cube roots by following a specific rod-based algorithm, a series of steps that systematically zeroed in on the solution. This system enabled the solving of systems of linear equations with multiple unknowns, problems that required a level of abstract thinking many cultures had not yet approached. A mathematician could arrange rods to represent the coefficients of different equations, then manipulate them through a process of elimination that is strikingly similar to the modern matrix method taught in algebra classes today. How do you solve for three unknown quantities without the symbolic notation of x, y, and z? You move colored sticks on a grid, watching the relationships between the numbers shift and resolve into a clear answer. The counting rod system was a complete mathematical environment, one that produced profound astronomical calculations and advanced engineering projects. Its legacy is hidden in the silent logic of the south-pointing chariot's gears and the precise dimensions of the iron chain bridges, all testaments to a civilization that could not only build for the ages, but could also calculate the very foundations of its world with a handful of simple sticks. These mathematical tools calculated everything from taxes to the heavens, but the results they produced had to be carried out into the world, often under a relentless sun or a downpour of rain. The ancient Chinese solution was a portable sanctuary, an engineering marvel designed for a single person. The umbrella was not merely a cloth on a stick. It was a symphony of collapsible mechanics, a feat of personal engineering that balanced immense strength with feather-light portability. At its heart was the frame, a complex skeleton carved from resilient yet flexible bamboo. Artisans would split the bamboo into thin, uniform strips, then steam and bend them into the elegant, arching ribs that give the umbrella its distinctive shape. The true genius, however, was in the joint that allowed this entire structure to fold. A small wooden runner would slide smoothly up and down the central shaft. When pushed upward, it forced the ribs to extend outward, locking the canopy into a wide, protective dome. A simple catch would hold it securely in this open position. To close it, one would release the catch and slide the runner back down, causing the ribs to fold inward in a perfectly synchronized collapse, reducing the entire apparatus to a slender, easy-to-carry cylinder. This collapsible frame was a masterpiece of kinetic design, a principle we now see in everything from modern tent poles to aerospace structures, but the covering was just as ingenious. For protection from the rain, the silk canopy was not merely sewn, it was meticulously waterproofed. Layers of fine silk were treated with natural oils, often from the tongue tree, creating a tight, water-resistant seal that caused rain to bead up and roll off the fabric. The process was an exacting chemical art, requiring multiple coats and careful drying to ensure the silk remained supple and did not become brittle. For the parasol, designed to shield the user from the sun, the fabric might be left untreated or even layered with paper to create a thicker, more opaque barrier against the heat. These were not mass-produced items, but personal statements of status and refinement. An official's umbrella, with its intricate bamboo lattice and richly oiled silk, was a symbol of his rank, a moving piece of architecture that declared his importance as he walked. Every component, from the flexibility of the ribs to the water-shedding property of the canopy, represented a deep understanding of materials and mechanics. How does a civilization bring the comfort of a roof into the palm of your hand? The answer lies in the gentle click of that sliding wooden runner, a sound that announced a private, portable space had been created, a small dome of engineered comfort in a vast and unpredictable world. Centuries before European balloonists ascended into the sky, Chinese lanterns were already floating on the night air, silent and serene. These Kongming lanterns were more than just beautiful festival decorations. They were the world's first operational hot air balloons, a practical application of physics that turned a simple paper shell into a vessel of light. The principle was one of brilliant simplicity, buoyancy. A small fuel cell, typically a block of wax or soaked paper, was fixed to a wire frame at the base of the paper lantern. When lit, the flame heated the air trapped inside the lantern's enclosed space. As the air warmed, it expanded, becoming less dense than the cooler air outside. This difference in density created lift, the same force that allows a piece of wood to float on water. Once the hot air inside was sufficiently light, the entire lantern would tug gently against its tether and then rise, a self-contained pocket of warm air climbing through the cooler atmosphere. The Chinese understanding of this thermal lift was not just theoretical, it was precise. The construction of the lantern was critical. The paper had to be lightweight enough to be lifted, yet sturdy enough to contain the heat without catching fire. The bamboo frame had to be both flexible and strong, forming a rigid structure that would not collapse as the lantern ascended into different air currents. The size of the fuel source was equally important. Too small a flame, and the lantern would not achieve lift. Too large, and it would incinerate the entire device in a matter of seconds. Getting it just right resulted in a stable, sustained flight that could last for minutes, carrying the lantern high into the darkness. On a calm night, these glowing orbs could drift for miles, their peaceful ascent belying their other, more strategic purpose. Armies used them for long-distance signaling. A single lantern rising from a hilltop could convey a prearranged message to a distant garrison, a silent, untraceable communication that no horseman could intercept. A coordinated launch of dozens could signal the start of an attack or a successful retreat, their collective glow visible across entire valleys. How many battles were won by a message written not in ink but in fire and air? This was a technology that harnessed one of the most fundamental forces of nature, not to conquer the earth, but to gently, quietly rise above it. That silent rise of a lantern was a gentle use of air, but on the ground, a far more monumental battle was being waged against the power of water itself. Vast hydraulic engineering projects transformed entire landscapes, taming rivers that had brought both life and destruction for centuries. The most enduring example is the Duzhongyan irrigation system, a network of levees, channels, and tunnels that has been calmly and efficiently functioning for over 2,300 years. Built in the 3rd century BC, it was not a dam that blocked the Min River, but a work of genius that respectfully redirected it. The engineers faced a brutal cycle. Each summer, meltwater from the mountains would roar down the Min River, flooding the fertile Chengdu plain and drowning crops. Then, in the drier seasons, the same region would parch, its fields cracking under the sun. The solution was not to fight the river's power, but to borrow from it. The system's heart was a long, man-made levee known as the Yuzui, or fish mouth. This structure was carefully positioned to split the river into 2 channels. The inner channel was dug deeper and narrower, while the outer channel was left wide and shallow. During the low water season, the deeper inner channel naturally drew 60% of the flow, providing a consistent water supply for irrigation. But when the summer floods came, the situation reversed. The raging, sediment-heavy floodwaters were too powerful to be contained by the narrow inner channel. They would spill over into the wide, shallow outer channel, which acted as a spillway, safely carrying the excess water and its destructive silt away from the farmlands. This was automatic flood control, designed into the very shape of the landscape. Further along, a drainage passage called the Feishayan, or flying sand spillway, served as a second line of defense. It was a carefully calibrated opening that used the river's own current to flush out any excess silt that might accumulate in the inner channel, preventing the system from clogging. The final piece was a man-made gorge cut through a mountain, the Beipingku, or precious bottleneck channel, which funneled the clean, regulated water directly onto the Chengdu Plain. This was not a single structure, but an integrated, self-regulating hydraulic system. It required no moving parts, no human intervention to open or close gates. It worked with the physics of the river, not against them. The result was the transformation of a flood-ravaged wasteland into one of the most productive agricultural regions in all of China, an achievement so profound that the system still waters over 5,000 square kilometers of farmland today. How do you build a machine that lasts for millennia, using only earth, rock, and an intimate understanding of a river's soul? The answer flows silently through the Duzhongyan system, a testament to engineering that seeks not to conquer nature, but to find a lasting peace with it. That same attention to personal well-being extended to the smallest and most intimate of daily rituals. In the Tang dynasty around the 7th century, individuals began their mornings with a tool that would revolutionize personal hygiene, the bristle toothbrush. Its handle was carved from animal bone or bamboo, a sturdy grip shaped to fit comfortably in the hand. At its head, a cluster of stiff, short bristles was firmly set into a series of small holes. These bristles were harvested from the coarse necks of hogs, a material chosen for its perfect balance of resilience and flexibility. This was not a simple chewing stick or a rough cloth. It was a designed instrument, a dedicated technology for cleaning every surface of the tooth. The act of brushing was often accompanied by a specially formulated tooth powder. These early toothpastes were complex herbal mixtures ground into a fine abrasive powder. Ingredients like ginseng, mint, and salt were common, selected for their believed abilities to strengthen gums, freshen breath, and scrub away residue. Some recipes included powdered oyster shells for extra abrasion, while others used medicinal herbs to soothe inflammation and prevent infection. This combination of a mechanical scrubber and a chemically active powder reveals a sophisticated understanding of oral care, an approach that addressed both immediate cleanliness and long-term health. The cultural importance of this practice was immense. A clean, healthy mouth was seen as a mark of refinement and social status, a sign that one cared for their body as a temple. Philosophical texts from the time linked oral hygiene to overall vitality, suggesting that gum disease could affect one's internal balance and energy. For the elite, possessing a finely carved bone-handled brush was a personal luxury, but the practice filtered through all levels of society in simpler forms. How many smiles were preserved, how much discomfort was avoided by the daily application of that simple brush and herbal powder. This was not just about vanity. It was a practical, preventative health technology that recognized the mouth as a gateway to the body's wellness, a quiet innovation that has echoed in bathrooms around the world ever since. A single thread of silk is stronger than a strand of steel of the same thickness, a natural marvel harnessed through a process of such secrecy that revealing it was once punishable by death. This was sericulture, an industry that wove together agriculture, biology, and mechanical engineering on a staggering scale. It all began with the silent, hungry life of the Bomix mori, the domestic silkworm. For over a month, these caterpillars did nothing but consume fresh mulberry leaves in meticulously controlled environments. Temperature and humidity were monitored with the precision of a laboratory, for a single draft or a day of improper feeding could ruin an entire crop of cocoons. When a silkworm was ready to spin, it secreted a continuous liquid filament from glands in its head, a protein that hardened upon contact with the air. Wrapping itself in this single, unbroken thread that could stretch for nearly a mile, it vanished into a tiny, off-white oval. The timing of the harvest was critical. To preserve the priceless continuity of the thread, most of the cocoons were plunged into vats of hot water or exposed to steam. This softened the natural gum, called sericin, that held the cocoon together, and it also prevented the pupa inside from maturing into a moth that would chew its way out and sever the long, perfect filament. In a delicate ballet of fingers, workers would then find the loose ends of several filaments and carefully draw them together, twisting them into a single, robust thread as they were wound onto a reel. This was the foundation of raw silk, a material so precious it was often used as currency, but the transformation was only half complete. This raw silk then moved to the loom rooms where engineering took over from biology. The drawloom was a beast of a machine, a complex framework of wood, cords, and heddles that looked more like a gigantic musical instrument than a weaver's tool. It required two people to operate, a weaver and a drawboy. The weaver sat at the front, passing the shuttle back and forth to create the basic fabric. The drawboy, often a young apprentice, sat perched atop the loom itself, surrounded by a labyrinth of cords. Each cord was tied to a specific set of warp threads. When the pattern called for a lift in the weave to create a dragon, a flower, or a cloud, the drawboy would pull the correct combination of cords. This action selectively raised thousands of individual warp threads, allowing the weaver to pass the colored weft thread underneath and lock the intricate design into place. It was a form of mechanical programming, a physical code of pulled strings that translated an artist's vision into a tapestry of breathtaking complexity. A single mistake by the drawboy could ruin weeks of work. This division of labor enabled the mass production of patterned silks that flowed along the trade routes, each bolt a compact fortune. How many empires were funded by the silent, patient spinning of a caterpillar and the coordinated pull of 100 cords? The answer is woven into the very fabric of history, a testament to a civilization that could industrialize the most delicate of natural processes. A single spark could now be summoned at will, not from the laborious friction of wood, but from a simple chemical reaction. Tucked into the belt of a traveler or resting in the kit of a soldier was a small, unassuming stick, its tip coated in a mysterious yellow substance. This was the ancestor of the match, a sulfur-tipped fire starter that transformed the ancient struggle for flame into a matter of simple convenience. The principle was one of brilliant chemistry over brute force. The key ingredient, sulfur, was well known for its low ignition temperature. A traveler needing a fire would carry one of these prepared sticks, along with a piece of tinder and a striking surface, often a rough shard of stone or a dried block of fungus. To create fire, they would simply scrape the sulfur-coated tip vigorously against this abrasive surface. The friction generated just enough heat to ignite the sulfur, which would then flare up with a distinct blue flame and the sharp, unmistakable smell of rotten eggs. This small, intense burst of fire was perfectly suited to light a prepared bundle of dry tinder, which could then be nursed into a full campfire or cooking flame. This was portable, instant combustion, a technology that severed the last tether to the communal hearth. Imagine the freedom this offered a lone merchant on the Silk Road, able to cook a meal or ward off predators without spending an hour trying to spark a flame with sticks. Consider the advantage for a military scout, able to signal his unit or warm his hands in a rain-soaked forest without betraying his position with the prolonged noise of traditional fire-making. This simple stick represented a profound understanding of material properties. The artisans who made them knew that sulfur burned readily, and that friction was the key to unlocking that energy. They were practicing applied chemistry, creating a controlled reaction that put the power of creation and destruction into the pocket of any prepared individual. How many cold nights were ended? How many meals were cooked because of that quick, acrid flare? This was more than a convenience. It was a democratization of one of humanity's oldest and most vital technologies, proving once again that the most profound revolutions often arrive on the smallest of sticks. A building made entirely of wood can dance with an earthquake and survive. For over 1,000 years, Chinese architects perfected a method of construction that did not fight the Earth's violent shudders, but absorbed them through a living, breathing framework. The secret was an interlocking puzzle of wood, a system of joinery so sophisticated that it required no nails, no glue, and no rigid connections. This was the art of dugong, the bracket set, the very soul of ancient Chinese architecture. Picture a pagoda, its wide, gracefully curved roof seeming to float effortlessly over the structure. This illusion of weightlessness was made possible by a complex network of wooden arms and blocks, layered like a tree's branches, that transferred the immense load of the roof down to the main pillars. Each dugong bracket was a self-contained unit of interlocking pieces, fitted together with such precision that a knife blade could not slip between them. The wood was carefully chosen for its grain and flexibility, often the resilient nanmu or cypress. The joints themselves were works of art, carved with a variety of shapes, from simple mortise and tenon to more complex dovetail and finger joints. Each cut was a calculated decision, allowing for a minute amount of movement, a controlled flex that was the key to the structure's resilience. When the ground began to tremble, a rigid, nailed building would resist until its weakest point shattered. But a dugong structure responded differently. The entire framework was designed to sway, with the interlocking brackets acting as a system of shock absorbers. The energy from the seismic waves would travel up through the pillars and into this flexible wooden lattice. The brackets would shift and groan, their precisely cut surfaces sliding against one another just enough to dissipate the destructive force. The joints would compress and then rebound, rocking the building like a cradle rather than letting it snap. It was a form of architectural judo, using the earthquake's own power against it. This brilliance extended to the entire structural philosophy. The most important buildings stood on stone platforms that isolated the wooden frame from dampness, but also acted as a stable base. The pillars were not anchored deep into the ground, but rested on stone plinths. This allowed the entire structure to shift as a single, unified unit during a quake, sliding safely on its foundation instead of being torn apart at a fixed point. The result was a building that could endure centuries of tremors, its wooden skeleton flexing and settling with each event but never collapsing. The Yingxian wooden pagoda, built in the 11th century, stands nearly 200 feet tall and is the oldest and tallest all-wooden pagoda in the world. It has survived dozens of major earthquakes, including one so violent it leveled every modern structure in the nearby county. Yet the pagoda, with its 54 different types of dugong brackets, merely swayed and then stood firm. How does a tower of wood outlast empires and defy the very earth it stands on? It does not stand rigid but learns to move, a testament to the wisdom of building in harmony with the forces of nature, not against them. Maps of the earth were only the beginning. The same culture that plotted its empire on a grid of silk also charted the very heavens above it, creating celestial records of such stunning accuracy that they still resonate with astronomers today. These were not mythical constellations sketched from imagination, but precise mathematical documents, the result of generations of patient observation. Imperial astronomers maintained a relentless vigil of the night sky, logging the position of every visible star, tracking the wandering paths of planets, and noting any temporary visitor, any anomaly that broke the perfect, predictable clockwork of the cosmos. Their star catalogues were vast libraries of light, mapping over 1,400 individual stars with coordinates so precise they could be used for navigation and calendar reform. But their true value lies in the moments they captured, the transient events frozen in time by a scholar's brush. One of the most famous of these records describes a guest star, a new light that appeared in the constellation of Taurus in the year 1054. The court astronomers described it as being as bright as Jupiter, visible even in the daytime for 23 days, and not fading completely from the night sky for nearly 2 years. For centuries, this was a curious historical footnote. Then, modern radio astronomers discovered the Crab Nebula, a vast, expanding cloud of gas and dust right at that same celestial location. Calculations showed this nebula was the remnant of a supernova, a star that had exploded, and the timing of that cataclysm matched the year 1054 exactly. The ancient Chinese had not just seen a new star, they had documented the violent death of a sun, providing a critical data point for astrophysics a millennium later. Their charts also contain meticulous records of comets, those mysterious wanderers with long, ethereal tails. Each appearance was carefully drawn, noting the comet's path, the length and direction of its tail, and its duration in the sky. By comparing these ancient observations with the calculated orbits of known comets like Halley's, modern scientists have been able to verify the sightings and even refine their understanding of how these orbits change over centuries. How do you verify an event that lasted for a single human lifetime, but whose light traveled for thousands of years? You find the note left by a watchman who saw it flare into being. These star charts were more than scientific records. They were a civilization's conversation with the universe, a dialogue written in ink and patience, proving that the most enduring technologies are not always made of metal, but of careful, relentless